Ethiopia was about to have after the coming into power of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And everybody had an expectation that it was going to be some sort of an election that could see a transition to a democratic process. But what instead happened was an election that did not even cover the entirety of the Ethiopian constituencies there. Tigray was absolutely missing, continued to be missing from the national parliament, 36 seats, and also from the upper house. And the last election did not happen in half of the Oromia region, which is the largest regional state, entirely in Gambela region, and also parts of Benshangul and in Somali Afar. So we had an election that was not complete enough in its sense. And the parliament was sworn in, and we got into, in fact, worse situation. That election was telegraphed as being like the most decisive election to usher in peace and stability in Ethiopia. What we have seen, and I think I wrote at that time for New York Times even, that this election is going to exacerbate Ethiopia's crisis. And it's exactly what it did. So I think Ethiopia's crisis today is beyond what an election could solve. If you look into it, because we will be having even less constituencies covered this time, as opposed to the last one. As opposed to half of Oromia, I think majority of the Oromia regional state could be inaccessible for electoral authorities to conduct a peaceful and fair election. Amhara region is entirely engulfed by the ongoing war, which the government again said was going to take just 2 weeks to resolve. But we have now entering the third year, and there is no indication that the government is taking this conflict seriously to have a dialogue and to have a peaceful resolution to it. The prime minister branded it as a destabilization by a few, road robbers or something like this. So there is the lack of seriousness. So the entire Amhara region is engulfed with that kind of crisis. So what does election mean in this circumstance? We don't know if the electoral authority is ready to have the Tigray region participate in the election so that it could be reintegrated back to the federation. So I think Ethiopia's crisis is past an election can solve at this moment. Over to you, Mike.
I mean, I agree with the points that have been made. The only other point I would add is really a kind of the historical one, which is one of the major accelerants of the conflict between the TPLF and the federal government in 2020 was disputes over elections, right? And so that's a warning sign, I think, as we move forward to upcoming elections. And the way I see it, at this point, it's quite unlikely you're going to have elections conducted in Tigray, and so you're going to have, again, a state of exception, as it was called by Tzadale, basically a interim administration in Tigray of sort of questionable, perhaps legal standing, and that's kind of an unsustainable situation, I think going forward. So I think, again, I'm quite concerned about all of that.
Peyton, let me go to a different topic from the questions. I'm going to combine a couple here. Peyton, can you speak to the role USAID played ahead of Pretoria, including the implementation of Pretoria, and where does the shuttering of USAID, or how does the shuttering of USAID affect any further efforts in the diplomatic space, but also, of course, just providing the assistance that so many IDPs need as well?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Nick, I don't have the numbers in front of me to answer that with the level of precision that I would like to, but unquestionably, the shocks across, I mean, it's not news to anybody listening in today, I assume, but the shocks across the global humanitarian and development system caused by the Trump administration's destruction of USAID are incalculable. And that is certainly true in somewhere like Ethiopia, right? Each country obviously has its own kind of history and relationship with USAID and with U.S. foreign aid more broadly. But it's certainly, whether it's even when you look at the issue of IDPs or refugee resettlement back into Tigray, I mean, these large UN agencies that would have to be called upon to facilitate any of those returns have been deeply damaged by the foreign aid cuts that the Trump administration has enacted. So that's, of course, not limited to Tigray, it's not limited to Ethiopia, but it certainly has had an impact. In terms of implementation of the COHA, of the Pretoria Agreement, I maybe will just say one thing, which is that I was shocked at the time in how slow the international system broadly inclusive but not limited to USAID was in terms of responding to the humanitarian conditions that existed in Tigray when the Pretoria Agreement went into effect. As I think was said at the beginning of the discussion, the Tigrayan people had, of course, endured tremendous suffering in the course of the war, and very limited, with a couple of windows of exception, very limited access for USAID and its partners, for other donors and their partners, for the United Nations into Tigray to attempt to mitigate or alleviate that suffering. And then when access actually to Tigray was opened, the international community, and this predated, in full fairness, certainly what's happened to USAID under the Trump administration, the international community, in my view, is very, very slow to seize the opportunity of that access to then respond to the enormous needs at scale and as expediently as one would have hoped. And I think that it was a tremendous disappointment for me, but never mind for the Tigrayan people, and something that I think we should not lose sight of, and hopefully is not repeated. I think there's also a great need to think about in this aid environment, again, not just because of USAID, but other donors, major donors are cutting their foreign aid budgets significantly across the world. If we were to have the sort of nightmare scenario that we're talking about, the likelihood of a humanitarian response at scale, irrespective of the security and political conditions, is not very high. And so that also, I think, is a sobering reminder of what the human cost could be of war, were it to erupt.
Yeah, fascinating. Tsadali, a question for you that actually relates to that, and especially with IDPs. The question is, you mentioned IDPs being used as a political pawn. Who is responsible for implementing the return of IDPs as outlined in Pretoria? Is it ultimately the Ethiopian federal government's job to enforce that? And why then has no progress been made on that front?